transformation, not renewal. A short essay written by Richard F. Adams and read by an AI of my voice. This belief that transformation is happening has historically been announced via a new logo, a town hall meeting, and a sudden insistence that everyone starts using the word journey and comes in to sit at desks like hamsters in a pet shop. Sometimes there's also a replacement office system. No one asked for it. No one likes it. None of this on its own constitutes transformation. What's actually happening? Renewal. Careful, procedural, comforting renewal, dressed up in the language of disruption. The distinction sounds academic until it isn't. Renewal preserves the past. Transformation takes it apart and replaces it. Confusing the two is how institutions reassure themselves they're changing, while ensuring nothing fundamental ever does. You'd have thought that by now companies would have got it, but still it happens. It's often a lack of imagination in people, that's the issue. And deep down, fear. But hey, this matters because we are living through a period where the underlying assumptions are starting to fail. Not with collapse or drama, but one by one, out of sight, until suddenly the scaffolding no longer holds. There's a moment somewhere between familiarity and vertigo when change turns into history before we've quite noticed it happening. You usually realize afterwards, looking back, wondering when exactly that thing became normal. I've worked in emerging technology since the early 1990s, long enough to have seen the same pattern repeat itself several times. Each cycle of innovation arrives announcing an ending, the final digitization, the ultimate transformation, the last great rewrite. And every time, once the noise fades and the consultants move on, something unresolved is left stirring underneath. We've spent a generation transforming business. Now, more quietly and with far less ceremony, business is transforming us. What began as technical optimization has drifted into cultural redesign. The globalization boom of the 1980s, driven by consultancy logic, management theory, and a faith that everything could be measured, optimized, and controlled, is reaching the end of its useful life. The corporate machine that optimized the world into efficiency is misfiring in a fog of oligarchical smoke designed to take our eyes off the ball. And through those faults, something stranger is beginning to take shape. To understand why this feels so unsettling, it helps to look at how we imagine the future in the first place. One way of looking is to recall that when we went from paper memo to email, we actually just speeded things up, but the nature of things stayed the same. We still use BCC in emails, FFS. Looking wider across culture, in 20th century science fiction, the future was usually just the present with better lighting and sexier clothing. Who doesn't love Bacquefoil uniforms with purple wigs? Utopian, orderly, often moneyless, and always suspiciously familiar, these societies were the shadows in Plato's cave cast by ourselves. We built starships, but carried our habits, hierarchies, and unresolved arguments along for the ride. Take Star Trek, Discovery, which hurls itself 1,000 years into the future. By any biological or social reckoning, that's roughly the distance from the Norman conquest to today. You would expect evolution to be written everywhere. Bodies reshaped by medicine and cybernetics, language bent out of form, culture warped by time itself. Instead, we see recognizable, well-groomed humans in slightly shinier uniforms, speaking in contemporary idioms, and dealing with problems that wouldn't feel out of place in a modern boardroom. The issue isn't production design, it's imagination. Between 1300 and now, European men grew around 7 to 10 centimeters taller and gained nearly 50 extra years of life. That represents a profound shift in physiology, diet, and expectation. So if less than a millennium of real history can do that, why do our fictional futures remain so stubbornly unchanged? The answer, I suspect, is that we struggle to imagine change that doesn't ask permission. History doesn't advance by agreement, it mutates. And yet we are experiencing apocalyptic change right now. When humans first planted seeds in the ground, in the Fertile Crescent, they weren't planning civilization. They were trying to make stable food supplies, or lunch, as now know it. From that decision came cities, empires, inequality, and pandemics. The resulting agricultural surplus delivered art and warfare at the same time. A few thousand years later, the Stockton and Darlington Railway collapsed distance across the northeast of England and created the urban world as we know it. A key result of steam power was that we got Birmingham. Who the fuck would have expected that? 66 years after the Wright brothers briefly lifted themselves into the air, wetting themselves with fear, humans stood on the moon, starting a massive conspiracy industry. Each leap arrived faster than the last, each one deeply unsettling from the speed of change and their effects. And then, or so it seemed, the curve flattened. Historically, it is clearly visible, but as it approaches us in time, it flattens out like some sort of transformation Doppler shift. Today, in business, we talk about transformation as if it were a software update, apply patch, reboot system, take out old black box, install new shiny black box, continue as before. But anyone who has lived through genuine innovation and transformation knows it doesn't simply upgrade systems. It rewires people. This is why forcing people to go to an office to work in the emerging tech landscape is utter fucking madness and a denial of nature for money and control purposes. Transformation now is not iterative. It is radical, complex, chaotic, unpredictable, and once underway, irreversible, creating after effects and unexpectedness everywhere. Most modern organizations can sense that things are shifting, but they often misread it as a branding problem or as something they will deal with as and when they can or need to. They refresh platforms, tweak values, sprinkle in some AI for good measure, then announce they've been reborn. What they've actually done is renewal, not reinvention. Renewal is comforting. It assumes the past was broadly correct and only needs a lick of paint. Get the decorators in, don't change the house. Deep transformation is frightening. It suggests the past itself may no longer apply. That the house has moved, but you haven't. To transform is to confront the possibility of extinction, to accept that the building you're standing in is well designed and perfectly functional, but still the wrong shape for the weather that's coming. The distinction matters more than it first appears. Renewal updates the surface while preserving the structure. It keeps existing ways of being the same as they were, but they look and feel a bit different. You repaint the sign, modernize the website, restructure departments, perhaps sacrifice a layer of middle management to appease the efficiency gods. The org chart shifts, job titles acquire extra syllables, and everyone attends rigidly planned workshops on agility. 6 months later, the same decisions are being made by the same incentive structures, only now accompanied by better slide decks. Transformation, by contrast, requires you to break the thing that's working, not the obviously broken parts, those are easy, but the machinery that still hums along, producing respectable quarterly results. The practices that created your success, but will not sustain it. The expertise that has hardened into doctrine. The cultural antibodies that attack anything genuinely new before it can prove itself either dangerous or useful. For workers, it means that on Monday morning they can't simply start typing and turn to their mate and chat. They have to break the existing muscle and mind memory. I watched this play out in the early 2000s when legacy telecoms operators finally accepted that the internet wasn't a passing phase. Most responded with renewal. They built web portals, launched digital divisions, hired consultants to write strategy documents about convergence. They kept their billing systems, hierarchies, capex cycles, and assumptions about customer relationships largely intact. These were all just digital versions of what already physically existed. Meanwhile, companies like Google were transforming the entire premise of communication infrastructure, not by improving telecommunications, but by making much of it irrelevant to the value chain. The telecoms renewed, the internet companies transformed. 20 years later, the result is obvious, and yet the lesson still refuses to settle. Part of the problem is structural. Public companies operate on quarterly rhythms, which makes genuine transformation almost impossible. Real change requires a period of productive chaos, of deliberately dismantling competencies built over decades, of looking measurably worse before you look better. Analysts don't reward that, consultancies don't advise it, shareholders don't fund it, CEOs rarely survive it. So instead we get transformation theatre, the language of disruption paired with the practice of incrementalism. The other problem is human. Organizations are not really organizations at all. They're collections of people with mortgages, reputations, and a perfectly reasonable preference for not detonating the systems that currently feed them. Asking someone to transform a company also often means asking them to make their own expertise obsolete. That isn't a technical problem, it's an existential one. The consultant's trick is to pretend otherwise, to sell transformation as a more ambitious version of renewal, complete with frameworks, roadmaps, and reassuring milestones. But transformation doesn't have milestones, it has thresholds. You don't know you've crossed one until you're already on the other side, and by then the old map no longer works. The agricultural revolution didn't optimize hunting and gathering, the factory system didn't improve craft guilds. Each genuinely new mode of production didn't extend what came before, it replaced and reformed it. That is what transformation actually means, not progress, but displacement. Our institutions still think in straight lines, but the economy now behaves like a chaotic 4D web. Data slides across borders that governance struggles to see. Work is less about labor and more about interaction. And yet we continue to measure success with industrial age instruments, KPIs, productivity metrics, and headcount, as if the rules hadn't already shifted under our feet. The real tragedy is that most organizations know this. In private, executives will admit their business models are slowly dying. They can describe, often with surprising clarity, exactly what would need to change. Then they explain, with equal precision, why it can't happen. The board wouldn't support it, the culture won't absorb it, the market won't allow the time. So they choose renewal again because renewal doesn't require courage or imagination, only budget and process. There are exceptions. Occasionally, a company genuinely transforms, usually because an external shock has made the alternative unthinkable. Netflix abandoning DVDs for streaming, Microsoft embracing open source after decades of hostility, Apple shifting from being a computer company to a services business that happens to sell hardware. Each move required not just new technology, but leadership willing to state plainly that what had worked so far was about to stop working. What's curious is how obvious these shifts appear in retrospect. Of course, streaming would replace physical media. Of course, software would move to the cloud. Of course, hardware would become a delivery mechanism for subscription revenue. The future, once it arrives, always feels inevitable. From the inside, when you're the one being asked to bet the company on an unproven model, it feels like madness. And perhaps that's the test. If your transformation program feels sensible, coherent, and comfortably managed, you're probably just doing renewal with a larger budget. Real transformation should feel slightly unhinged. It should make your finance team uneasy and your operations director quietly furious. It should involve discarding things that still work in favor of things that might not. Because the alternative, continuing to optimize a model that's already being replaced, is actually the riskier bet. It just doesn't feel that way until it's too late. While organizations hesitate, politics drifts backwards. The new aristocracy wears hoodies instead of crowns, but the structure is familiar. A small group of technology barons rule invisible territories, digital estates, stretching from California to Singapore. They extract value in code and metrics while paying allegiance to no one. If the last industrial revolution built railways, this one builds algorithms, and every citizen is freight. Universal basic income drifts in and out of fashion as the humane response to transformation. It's usually presented in soft language and careful tones. Beneath it sits a harder question. Who pays when machines generate more wealth than people? The companies that benefit most from automation have also become adept at engineering themselves out of taxation. The loop closes quietly, efficiently, and without much scrutiny. And yet, beneath the noise, the future is still rehearsing. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and new energy systems are converging into patterns we barely recognize. This is not the next chapter of the industrial story. It's a side branch, something closer to a species learning how to dream differently. When it arrives, it doesn't feel like progress, it feels like dislocation. The first farmers didn't think they were inventing civilization. The first railway engineers didn't believe they were redefining time and space. Both were caught inside revolutions they didn't yet have language for. We are in exactly the same position now. The changes of this generation look ordinary, right up until the moment they don't. If history has a rhythm, it's a low hum of transformation disguised as routine. From the inside, everything feels familiar until suddenly it isn't. And when the machinery of the present finally judders to a halt, we'll look back and label it a turning point. Much of my own work has taken place inside this machinery. In rail and transport, technology is not abstract, it's visceral. A new data platform might alter a timetable, but it also reshapes how millions of people move, meet, and experience time itself. Integrating systems is never just a technical exercise. It's a social negotiation between safety, trust, and motion. Railways were once the internet of their age, compressing distance and rewriting cities. The work I do now, designing architectures for complex systems, carries the same impulse. The tools have changed, the language more abstract, but the purpose remains connection. Each new layer of technology doesn't simply modernize infrastructure, it changes the story we tell ourselves about who we are and how we move through the world. If we're lucky, the next transformation will do the same, only faster, deeper, and far stranger than we expect. It won't arrive in a keynote or a strategy deck. It won't ask permission, and it almost certainly won't come with a new logo. By the time we realize it wasn't just another renewal cycle, the slides will already be out of date. The terminology will sound quaint, and someone somewhere will be announcing a phase 2. History has a habit of doing that. It changes everything, then leaves us arguing about the color scheme. Find me on Substack as Richard F. Adams.